Every night for 2 weeks straight, we heard the sound of footsteps coming closer and closer to our beach house, but we never saw anyone. My fiancé and I had just moved in together after being engaged for almost a year. Burned, and after spending so much money on our new beach house, we were excited to spend our first summer there, because the previous owners had walked away from it during the final stages of renovation due to some unforeseen circumstances. We didn't think much of it at the time, and we were able to purchase the home for almost half of what they had listed it for just a few months prior. It was like a dream come true. Sometimes in the morning we would wake up to the sound of footsteps on the wooden planks of our dock out by the water. Other times we would hear what sounded like screams in the night, though we never could tell exactly where they were coming from. We even started seeing what appeared to be footprints in the wet sand near the shore, but they were always too blurry to make out any details. We assumed that these were probably just kids playing around, and we didn't think anything more of it. It was a beautiful, newly renovated home that we found about 2 hours away from where we both grew up. We bought a $1,000 home security system, complete with cameras, motion sensors, an alarm, and signs to post on our lawn. That was when we heard it again, the sound of heavy footsteps approaching the house. We watched the live feed from the security camera, and there it was again, the same tall, thin figure. This time it wasn't standing still, though. It was moving closer and closer to our front door. Then we sat in the dark, waiting for whatever was out there to try and break in, reach the front steps, and then stopped. For a moment, we thought it might knock on the door or try to push it open, but it didn't. The woman on the other end of the line identified herself as the previous owner of our house. Apparently, it had been unlisted ever since. When we asked her why she had Ian and told us this when we first contacted her a week ago, she simply said that she didn't want to scare us off, and everything to do with the people who had shown up to view the house. After showing the property to potential buyers a few times, they started receiving calls from people claiming that they had seen ghosts on the property and begged the realtors not to show their house to anyone else. So they sold all of their furniture, packed up their belongings, and left. It was the reason that the renovations were so far along but still unfinished. The sellers had gotten so scared that they just stopped working on the house altogether and never went back. They didn't even bother to cancel the listing, hoping that the people who were stalking them would assume that the house was still occupied. And of course, the agents insisted that they continue with the showings so that they could make some money, but they refused. And then she started to explain. We were left with more questions than answers. Why were people stalking them? Who was the tall man in the fog, and how did he get onto our property? Was he watching us the whole time? And what did he want? She explained that she had tried calling us several times, but we must have been blocking her number. She and her husband had lived there since 1980 and loved it with all of their hearts. But as they got older, it became harder to maintain, and they eventually decided to sell it and move to a smaller place in town, and wanting to make an offer on the spot. Every time this happened, the homeowners had to hide in a back room until the coast was clear. They were terrified that someone would find them and do something terrible. That's when they contacted a realtor and put the house up for sale in the fall of 2020, because our phone company had informed her that their calls were going straight to voicemail. She said that she wanted to talk to us about the house, because there was something very important that we needed to know. Instead, the figure slowly backed away and disappeared back into the fog. All we saw was a thick fog rolling in from the shore, slowly covering everything in sight. The next morning, after, of course, not sleeping at all, we went out to check the security footage and noticed something strange. We walked around the entire house, checking every inch of it to see if there were any signs of a break-in or any other obvious point of entry. And that's when we made a horrifying discovery. The path that the figure had taken to our house was UNA, actually on any of our security cameras. We checked the footage from the cameras facing our driveway and saw that it had come from the right side of the house, where there were no cameras. It was hunched over, its head almost touching the top of the wood paneling that ran along the side of the house. It stood there motionless for a long time, just staring at us through the window. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it turned around and disappeared into the fog. Then, just as quickly as it arrived, it disappeared. But the next night it came back, along with the sound of heavy footsteps near the house. What we didn't know was that those stairs had been covered up for years, intentionally blocked from view by the people who had renovated the house before us. And now it seemed like whoever or whatever was out there was using them to spy on us from the basement window, which happened to be directly under our bedroom. We waited on hold for hours sometimes, listening to elevator music while the cost of our calls steadily increased. Neither of us wanted to admit it, but we were terrified. My fiancée was convinced that it was some kind of escaped mental patient. Boo had been hiding in the nearby woods and that he was coming after us specifically. On the other hand, I thought it might have just been some homeless person who had taken shelter in our unfinished basement while they were waiting for warmer weather. They probably had no idea that we were home and would probably leave soon enough on their own. When we finally got a real person, they told us that they were not going to send anyone out to check on our well-being, insisting that if there was a real emergency, we would have seen flashing lights and heard sirens in the distance by that point. So we hung up and made the decision to just deal with whatever it was on our own. My fiancé and I looked out the window again, but this time we saw something that made the hair on the back of our neck stand on end. It had white siding, black window shutters, and a long wraparound porch with a built-in swing in the center. It was the inside of the house that really made us fall in love with the place. There were 4 bedrooms in total. We decided to turn one of them into a home office, Pret, which we spent most of our time in during the weekdays, when we were on to working at our jobs in the city. The other 3 bedrooms we left, mostly empty, saving them for whenever we decided to start a family. The master bedroom was absolutely massive. I took up almost half of the second floor and had huge windows that looked out over the ocean. In fact, every room in the house had ocean views, which is what drew us to it in the first place. We spent all of last fall and winter making it our own. And now that spring was here, we couldn't wait to get out of the city and relax by the sea. The house itself was old, but we got it at such a good price on the outside. The house was beautiful. The first week went by without a hitch. It was just the two of us getting settled in and enjoying the peace and quiet of living by the sea. We spent most of our days working remotely from the office, while listening to the waves crash on the shore, taking breaks to walk down to the beach and take long swims in the frigid Atlantic water. Brew. And then we would come back home, light some candles, open up the windows and let the salty breeze flow through the house while we cooked dinner and watched movies on the couch. Aizu. It was almost too perfect. But as the second week began, things started to change. At first, it was subtle. Then, one evening, we heard a loud bang on the side of the house, and we both ran to the window to look out. Standing on the edge of our dock was a tall, thin figure, no wider than what looked to be a telephone pole. We called the police to report it, but they never came. That same night, my fiancée and I lay in bed trying to comfort each other. Either way, we agreed that we needed to find a way to protect ourselves. So we did what any rational couple would do. Hours went by, and we started to feel like maybe we had just wasted a lot of money on something that wasn't even there. As the minutes ticked by, we watched in suspense as the figure continued to approach the house. At this point, we were sure that whatever it was would come back, but it didn't. That's when we decided to investigate further. In the corner of the yard, behind overgrown bushes and weeds, we found a set of stairs leading down into the basement of our brand new house. And that's when we received the phone call that changed everything. It turns out that the house had been listed for sale back in January, a little over a month after we purchased it. According to her, the house had been in her family for generations, passed down from her grandparents to her parents, and then to her. But the reason that they took it off the market so soon after listing, it had nothing to do with us. The potential buyers didn't stop there. Some of them even showed up at the house unannounced, having seen the for sale sign out front. It got to the point where they couldn't even step foot outside without seeing someone hiding in the trees watching them. And that's when we learned that the house had been abandoned for nearly 10 years. The woman on the phone started to cry. She apologized for not telling us this sooner and, for whatever reason, hung up the phone abruptly after that. To this day, we have no idea. But we don't live there anymore. As our baby was talking to the sea woman under the floor, I had no idea what she would say back to him through his baby monitor. I wish I hadn't found out. It was a small blue shark that made a sound like a whale song whenever you squeezed it. He loved this toy, Bill. He would hold it close to his ear and rock it back and forth, saying, "Do-do-do." Bye. I jumped out of bed and ran to his neck. He was sitting up in his crib, babbling and making sounds, and then suddenly he stopped. We unplugged the monitor and left the room, not knowing what to do. Suddenly, we heard noises coming from the baby monitor. Once again, we went into his room and saw him sitting up in his bed, looking towards the monitor. I asked him who was in there and why they were making those noises. P responded by saying, "The sea woman under the floor wants to come out." My blood ran cold and I quickly shut off the monitor. Was this the sea woman? Why would they hide her in our house? Where was she? We all froze. My husband and I looked at each other in disbelief. He said we had to go, but I wanted to stay behind to protect him. What if the sea woman was still there and she wanted to take him with her? I wanted to throw the gown away, but he said we should take it to the police. They would know what to do with it. You may ask. Because of that baby monitor. Every night, I hear movement in the vents, footsteps above my head, and scratching at the wall. And sometimes I hear whispering. I've never been able to listen to a whisper in my life, but I swear the voices are getting closer. At first, we thought maybe he could talk now, or maybe he was trying to tell us something. Oh, God, he said. We have to get out of here right now. I asked him what was wrong, but he didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed the box and ran out the door. I didn't want to scare them off. I mean, who would believe me anyway? But I need your help. I'm so scared. I'm writing this message to whoever finds it. If you hear any unusual noises coming from your baby monitor, unplug it and burn it. Don't ask any questions. Just do what I said. I called after him, but he didn't stop. I was going to find out what was under the floor. It wasn't a good place to leave it, but we didn't know what to do with it. As we were watching TV, we heard a knock at the door. We never did get an answer from the police about what was in that box. We were both scared, but it turned out to be the police. Descend. They had gotten our message and were there to pick up the box. When my husband came home that evening, I told him what I was up to. What are you doing? You can't just rip up the floor, he said calmly. As he pried it open, a horrible smell filled the air. There were some clothes in there, but nothing else. I pulled out a white nightgown. It was very old and dirty. There was a tag on it that said, "Property of Eastern State Psychiatric Hospital." What was this place doing with a nightgown like this? I knew he was right, but I couldn't help myself. I felt like the longer I waited, the stronger she might become. I told him to just let me finish up in the nursery. Our house was built in the 1960s, so it was pretty common for them to fill in the gaps between the floorboards with sawdust mortar. That's how we got the name for the sea woman under the floor, because it sounded like waves crashing when he talked to it. We figured that it must have been a one-time thing, and we probably imagined the rest of it. I thought maybe he had hurt himself, and I rushed to pick him up, but he was fine. It was almost as if he had been talking to someone or something. That sound would drive me crazy after a while. And so when I was home alone, I would grab the toy in the morning. After, of course, not sleeping at all, I went into his room and asked him what he had said to his monitor. Nothing was there. No sign of anything ever having been hidden under there. But I kept going. I went into his room and continued to dig. I was getting angry. I ripped up the boards faster. Then suddenly, my hands touched something solid. It was a wooden box. He looked at me with innocence once again and asked for his shark. But there was something strange about it this time. P wasn't holding it in his hand, but there it was on the monitor, clearly showing in front of him. Plugged in and turned on, but it didn't make any noise. And dunk it in water, pretending that the sea creature was back in the ocean. I would then give it back to him, and he would look at me with big, innocent eyes and ask for it again. So we kept repeating that whole thing over and over again. It all started with me buying my son, who was just 10 months old at the time, a new toy. The nights were the worst, though. he would scream and cry for his shark. And I would have to go into his crib and tell him that the little sea creature was asleep and that he needed to sleep too. I tried everything to get him to stop asking for it in the middle of the night, but nothing worked. P absolutely loved bath time. He would splash and play. But once he had his shark toy, he wouldn't take it out of the water. Then one night when my husband and I were fast asleep, we heard the most terrifying sound, his baby I went back to bed and told my husband to keep an eye on him. My husband and I looked at each other in disbelief. That was until it happened again. My husband and I were lying in bed watching TV. The next day, I decided that I couldn't take it anymore. I went to the store and bought some equipment to help me tear up the floorboards. While our son was playing on the floor, I started ripping up the floorboards in the living room. I called my husband over to help me open it. My husband and I looked at each other with a mix of confusion and fear. On the way out the door, our son, who had been playing quietly, suddenly screamed, "No, don't leave her here." When we returned home later that night, we put the box in the living room. When they opened it, one of the officers gasped. My husband and I were so scared that we locked all the doors and windows that night and stayed up until sunrise. And that's when things got really scary. I haven't slept in our house since. Not one single night. But why not? I haven't told anyone what I'm about to tell you now. I'm so sorry, but I have to go now. Goodbye. I found a rock monolith engraved with a desperate warning. Doze, don't stay past the third. Night he comes when the tide shifts. But where was he? Who was he? And how would I know when the tide shifted? The incessant chirping of crickets filled the air as I stood there, staring out into the blackness over the water. As a kid, I had spent countless hours exploring tide pools and searching for treasures. The beach held a certain allure that I just couldn't resist. So there I was, back at the shore, exploring the very same tide pools I used to frequent as a child. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, lurking just beyond my sight. It started subtly, like a whisper in the darkness, but it grew louder as the hours passed. I froze, my breath catching in my throat as I stared at the movement. What was it? A large, black shape, like a human silhouette, seemed to be gliding along the beach. It moved with an eerie grace, flowing and shifting in ways that seemed unnatural. It was standing motionless on the beach, seeming to watch me. Terror gripped me. What was this thing? Why was it here? As if sensing my fear, the creature lurched forward, moving with a speed that was unnerving. I screamed and ran, stumbling over rocks and seaweed, my feet pounding the hard-packed sand. I didn't dare look back, but I could feel its presence behind me, closing in. I burst through the trees, the house coming into view. Safety. I could reach it. I could get away. I strained to see, but the darkness was thick, obscuring any details. Just as I felt the first hand of cool relief touch me, a low growl resonated from behind me. I whirled around, my eyes scanning the darkening landscape. There was nothing there. Had I imagined it? Was I losing my mind? I whipped my head around to see a dark shape rising out of the sea. It was him, or was it it? I couldn't tell. All I knew was that it was huge, like a giant emerging from the depths. Its skin was dark and slimy, and its eyes, oh God, its eyes glowed an eerie red in the gloom. It opened its mouth and a guttural voice boomed, "You shouldn't have stayed." And with that, it lunged toward me. The figure kept moving, never staying still, always receding and then reappearing in a different spot. The pull was irresistible, like a magnet. I had to know. I had to see. The tide had indeed shifted. The water had receded, exposing more of the rock monolith. Now it was clear that it wasn't a natural formation. It was a monolith, a man-made structure deliberately placed here to send its silent message. And that message was now clearer than ever. Don't stay past the third night. He comes when the tide shifts. He. Who was he? The question echoed in my mind, and the answer, whatever it was, seemed to be hidden just beyond my understanding. Was it real, or was my mind playing tricks on me? I stumbled back, my mind racing. The third night was tonight. What was going to happen tonight? I wanted to run, to escape, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. Fear, raw and primal, surged through me. I needed to get out of there, but I couldn't move. I was frozen with terror. Cricut's incessant chirping took on a sinister tone, and the sound of the waves crashing against the shore became a menacing roar. I tossed and turned. My sheets tangled around me like a shroud. The message from the rock monolith echoed in my mind. He comes when the tide shifts. When, how, and who was he? Fear coiled in my stomach, a constant companion refusing to let go. The slightest noise, a twig snapping, an animal rustling, sent shivers down my spine. I listened intently, straining to hear anything, my heart pounding with each sound. The darkness was thick, pressing down on me, suffocating me with its immensity. Dawn couldn't come fast enough. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, each thud echoing the rhythm of the waves. The isolation of the beach house suddenly felt oppressive. The vast darkness outside pressing in on me from all sides. The rocking of the house in the wind made me jump at every creak and groan. Every time I turned around, I felt as though I was being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck would stand on end, and I would swear I could feel eyes boring into me. But when I turned around, there was nothing there. Buck. I pulled back the curtains and stepped out onto the deck. The beach below was deserted. The dark shape from the previous night was nowhere to be seen. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. As I scanned the beach, my eyes fell on a set of footprints. They were large, deeper than any footprints I had ever seen, like those of some enormous creature. They started from the water's edge and led up to the tree line. I rushed down the stairs and onto the beach, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to get as far away from this place as possible. I needed help. I needed someone with me. I could barely make out the silhouette of the gnarled old dock against the backdrop of the velvety night sky. It wasn't anything I could quite put my finger on. The rocks that lined the shore were strangely shaped, and some of them almost looked like they had been carved by human hands. I stopped to take a closer look, and that's when I saw it. One of the rocks had a message carved into it. The message was simple, stark, and terrifying. Don't stay past. The third night he comes when the tides shift. My heart skipped a beat as I read the message. Who had carved it there, and what did it mean? Was it some kind of warning? There was just something about the vastness of the ocean and the solitude of the beach that was unsettling me. I tried to shake off the feeling and focus on the beauty that surrounded me, but the unease only grew. In the distance, I could hear the faint strains of a distant song, but it wasn't carried on the wind. It seemed to be coming from within my own head. The melody sounded hauntingly familiar, yet I couldn't quite place it. Earlier that day, I had been drawn to the beach behind the rental house like a moth to a flame. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, I began to feel a sense of unease creep over me. As I continued to wander along the beach, I noticed something strange. As the days passed, I found myself becoming increasingly obsessed with the message. On the second night, the fear started to creep in. That's when I noticed it, a dark shape moving just outside my window. Sleep evaded me that night. When the first light of dawn finally touched the horizon, I got up, my body stiff and sore from a night of fitful rest. But as I turned to run back to the house, I saw it again, the dark shape from the night before. I pounded on the door, my hands shaking, my breaths coming in ragged gasps. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I found myself drawn back to the beach. There was a new message carved into the stone. He comes for you. My blood ran cold. What did it mean? Who was coming for me? Then I heard it, a splash in the water.